starting recording now, so.
And holy shit, this game looks flat if you if you use scene post-processing instead of Ryan scene post-processing.
Looks like we're gonna invade Hoggies.
Is scene like the normal one?
No, Willow scene post-processing is the normal one. Scene
I feel
post-processing,
seen.
as far as I understand, is the same thing but without the outlines.
I see.
Whereas Orion adds like.
Wasn't it just like any word though? Like is the same? Because it's just like
No.
there are like some words that are relevant, and then any other one is like, just,
Oh,
you know.
probably actually, yeah.
Like I feel like Ryan scene and literally any other word that isn't one of the actual modes would be the same.
Maybe.
Okay, wait. There's a diamond block here.
I assume Orion is like the one with better lighting, and it has to be like specifically Ryan, whereas just scene post-processing would be.
There's a diamond block.
Mods are asleep post-processing.
It probably just gives you a shitload of money.
So we got 2 flashes and a kill.
I think you're gonna be
I'll
pretty
take that.
happy. It gives 5 iridium.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah. 69 iridium now.
I got 7 stacks of my passive walking into lane. Let's go.
I need more than 7
I don't have
stacks
Q.
of anarchy, am I right? Okay.
Anarchy is the best kind of archy.
It is.
Like if you
What other
agree.
archies do you know of?
I don't know, man.
Well, there you go.
Why are you asking me this stuff? I really do be
I'm just
autoing this
verifying
fizz,
that it's the best archie you know of.
What? Give me level 2 already, game. What the heck?
Charco.
I'm trying to commentate my League of Legends, so I can't
We
focus on
didn't get it.
every single thing. Yeah, that's nice.
That is nice.
Oh, they got a
Hey,
Fizzerino.
here's a skin you already have.
How many autos are they gonna let him get?
Hell
I don't
yeah.
know why his attack
Do you
speed
have
is so
that
high.
skin already?
Oh, nice. I lagged out. Yeah, I'm gonna leave the call. Bye-bye. Go back to this.
Films just like this. I thought I'd call it quits for now. Speaking of, there's still one more movie to talk
Oh,
about.
I missed it. I
Savior
don't
of
have
the
too long.
Earth. Wait, didn't we already do this one? Is it weird that I was kind of relieved by this film being animated? I thought I'd never want to see another rip-off animated film again, but somehow this was a breath of fresh air after everything I'd already seen. It's not good by any means.
Pretty good
It's actually
trade,
pretty
honestly.
hilariously bad in multiple ways. But it was the first out of these
A lot
4
of
that didn't have me
enemy aggro.
checking my watch every couple of minutes. Maybe I'm just a
kinda
fanboy
hard
of
to see
2D
us when it
animation, no
lands.
matter how terrible it is. So, Savior of the Earth, or its original Korean title, Computer... Here it goes. Hum Pokpa Dejection, directly translating as Computer Nuclear Warship Bombing Operation. Gosh, that's a mouthful. Is a cheaply animated hour-long film that directly lifts many story ideas and visuals from the 1982 Disney movie Tron. It released in 1983, meaning all of the animation would have been rushed together in well under a year, hence the relatively cheap nature of it. Now, unlike the previous movies I've mentioned, where I was familiar with the source material, Tron is a movie I'd heard a lot about but had never seen until doing research for this video. To be honest, I didn't get that much out of it, seeing as it's aged so poorly in the worst way possible. But I do respect how revolutionary certain aspects of its presentation were for the time. Savior of the Earth, in contrast, has very little in terms of groundbreaking ideas, but I have to say I was genuinely surprised at how much variation there was in the animation, shading, and background artwork. Usually these rip-off films try about 900% less than this film does. Obviously, I mentioned that this film was produced in Korea. However, in 1987, it was dubbed into English to attempt to reach a bigger audience. And this is where the worst aspect of the film lies. Aside from the obvious copyright infringement, to the point where some sequences from Tron are pretty much stolen verbatim, the English version of this film was actually directed by Roy Thomas, a prolific writer for Marvel, who was the second major writer after Stan Lee, God rest his soul. This is one director's credit on IMDb. I'm just sort of stunned that this even happened. I've never seen such a big name attached to one of these types of films before. Anyway, at first, the plot is actually quite different to that of Tron's. It depicts a villain who finds the ultimate energy source and uses his great power to start
love when
causing
that
chaos
happens.
all around the globe. After a breaking point, the World Summit is called and 3 main characters are assigned with the job of stopping him, at which point they all get sucked inside a computer and it basically just becomes Tron, where they have to play games for their lives and try to survive in the computer landscape. One thing I will say is that it's really difficult to tell when a scene is supposed to be set in the real world or inside the computer. In the original Tron, there's a very stark contrast between the two, and there are enough visual indicators to let you know where you're supposed to be. But in Savior of the Earth, there really isn't much of a difference a lot of the time. They have cave formations and rocks inside the software, so it's hard to keep track at times. Really, one of my main takeaways from this film is that it seemed to be quite racist. I'll show you an example to see what I mean. Yikes! Later on in the film, a guy shows up who they refer to as Black John. What's wrong with just John? As I already mentioned, the voice acting is next level bad.
Got him.
Black John is clearly voiced by the whitest guy probably ever born. Whenever I hear his voice, I can't help but picture Ben Stiller for some reason. It reminds me of that infamous clip from that anime Black Heaven.
Hey, what the fuck? You got a fucking problem?
This voice acting's so bad, it's somehow worse than Hunt Down the Freeman, which is quite a feat, believe me. I'm convinced they only had one male voice actor and one female, and they didn't even try to distinguish their voices from character to character. Here are some hilariously terrible examples.
Tyelebot.
There isn't really anything else of note about this movie, aside from small notes like how one of the villains looks identical to the one from Tron, and all sorts of other details that bigger fans of Tron will probably notice, which are obviously all straight lifted from it. The funniest thing about it is definitely the English dub, which is easily the worst I've ever heard. When I was trying to find this movie, I initially tried buying a physical copy for £158.61, because that's all I could find, but it got lost in the post and I got refunded, which is probably a good thing, honestly. This right here is not worth that kind of money. In the end though, I found someone had uploaded the entire film to YouTube with 30 views and 1 like and 1 dislike. I appreciate how in the description it's noted as having mild violence and racism. It's interesting how this movie kind of rounds off the 4 choices that are in this video. The English name is really similar to Turkish Star Wars' The Man Who Saved the World, and it steals famous music for its own use. Like, for no reason they just start playing Dank Earth. It has an entire sequence in a cave just like Alien 2, and it has the same runtime as Jaws in Japan. I really feel like this film should make me more angry, but when one of these films isn't boring the entire time, it just seems so entertaining in comparison. Oh, Christmas. Ranking the collection.
This is so easy.
So there we are, another 4 of these godforsaken cash grabs for the books. I guess it's time I ranked them from favourite to least favourite, and then add them to the entire Search for the Worst list. Despite its problems and feeling way too long, one cannot deny how simply epic Turkish Star Wars is. I'd happily put a poster up of that movie, it's so dumb and charming. Out of these 4, it's the one you could definitely have the most fun with friends watching. Next up, I'd have to say Saviour of the Earth. It's much more entertaining and doesn't drag as much as the others, and the terrible dub is too consistently funny to ignore. Next up, I'd say Alien 2. I've never seen a movie be so blatant about its filler. It's so poorly written and cheap in every way possible, but it has its moments, and the cave scenes at least looked surprisingly decent. Or should I say surprisingly decent. Last and least is Jaws in Japan. Honestly, my current least favourite movie of all time. It's quite a feat to make 70 minutes feel like 70 hours, so props for that. But it's
See how they do on this
skin-crawlingly
fight. I
slimy
think they should be able to
and
get Leon if they
exploitative
try.
of the women involved, and worst of all,
that was close on
repetitive and
Cyrus' part.
turgid to the point of tears. Not to mention it being a shark movie where the shark only shows up in the last 2 minutes, and it looks like absolute ass. For shame. I've added all of these
Interesting
movies to the ever-growing
flash.
Search for the Worst ranking list, which you can find on my Letterboxd profile, which will be linked in the description. Thank you all for watching. Let me know which one of these movies you think looks the best and worst in the comments below. Make sure you check out the initial reactions to these
I thought he was
movies
just
and the
gonna
trial
run
to
at me
watch for this
'cause he's
episode
kinda
once that's been released and isn't immediately
the
taken
smartest
down.
so
We'll
far.
see you on the next video. Bye.
to help out bot. I might be a little bit late, let's see. But I have exhaust. I don't know flash. Control word here. There we go. That should get him. That's pretty good, I'll say. I didn't expect them to really stay long enough for us to kill all of them, but yeah, Jinx put in some work there.
The first day you opened, the first day you had a customer, the first day you taught a class, had a client, a patient, a session.
I thought they were gonna attack more.
Open.
This Jinx stayed very, very far away.
Before you open, who could ever sleep? Open.
Sad.
But there's a different question we
Why is it so long?
Hello and welcome to my assessment of all the superhero movies from the year of 2018. This is an annual video series that documents my thoughts on
Oh,
the
you have a
immense
jungler.
collection of these films that
Okay.
are squirted out every year, in an attempt to see if they are generally getting better, more tiresome,
Most
or simply
games they
staying
don't.
the same. 2018 was somehow even more packed with superhero flicks than 2017 was, with a decided total of 9 movies to discuss. Unfortunately, from the title of this video, you can probably guess that I actually dislike
Man,
or was
really all
completely
Jinx had to do was
indifferent
right
about the
click,
majority of them.
the fizz while
However,
she was
that's not to
attacking
say
me.
that there aren't a couple that I passionately enjoy, for both
Would I have that
positive
easy?
and negative reasons. This time, instead of organising the video around the various studios that released them, I'll simply be talking about the films in order, starting with my least
Kha'Zix, you're
favourite
so
and
slow.
gradually going through to my favourite. If you don't care about the film I'm talking about or simply want to pick
I
and
didn't
choose
take it.
based around which movies you're interested in, there are time codes in the description for each separate movie. So with that out of the way, let's start with what I think is the worst superhero movie of 2018 and go from there. I think Venom is easily the worst superhero movie of 2018 for a myriad of reasons. It's a dated, tone-deaf mess of a movie that has no real through line or solid justification as to why it exists. Well, aside from the obvious. Never for a single second does the film feel like it was birthed from an actual idea for a story that needed to be told. I think it really was as simple as Sony Pictures looking at what valuable intellectual IP they had available and effectively abusing their goodwill with Spider-Man being so beloved in the MCU to vomit out a loosely connected movie that can ride off the coattails of the people who actually know what they're doing. I genuinely think that a large amount of general audience members probably just assumed that Venom was somehow part of the official MCU because of the Marvel logo at the beginning. And it even has the typical tease for the next movie in the credits, just like a Marvel movie. I wouldn't blame anyone for getting confused. It's a sneaky maneuver to be sure. But anyway, the issue with the film is not that Hollywood plopped out a rushed movie that is banking off the success of popular trends. It's that the movie is just poorly thought through and has very little of substance or value. If you apply even the most basic line of thought to any aspect of the movie, it basically compounds on itself to the point where it becomes so frustrating that you just have to give up. I think Venom is kind of a tough character to pull off in a movie as is, in live action form anyway. He's incredibly goofy and largely uninteresting to me as a concept. This might be because I'm pretty much at my wit's end with superhero movies having villains that are just the superhero but a baddie. It's the kind of thing I would have thought up when I was 14. It's very silly. I do think the Venom goo could be interesting as a plot device to have Spider-Man go through some kind of drama and self-growth in a film that was dedicated to the idea, but obviously Spider-Man isn't in Venom, so the writers had to think of something else to do. And what creative plan did they come up with? Well, they don't really embrace the bombastic, evil side of what the character could be, for the fear of having to market a movie that has a maniacal, cannibalistic murderer as the protagonist, even though technically that's still kind of what he is. So they majorly toned it down. They nerfed the best thing about Venom and Eddie Brock by having Eddie Brock, played by
If I
Tom
hit
Hardy,
literally
being
anything,
every
she
man
would've died.
who's so overly nice to every single person that he meets that it comes across as laughable. It's so over the top that even when his character is at rock bottom, after losing his job and his girlfriend, he's still willing to give a homeless lady $20 for a newspaper that's supposed to be free. And this is set in one of the most expensive places to live in America, San Francisco. But even that aside, that's still not the biggest issue with the movie. It's kind of going for a buddy cop tone where Tom Hardy is a good guy who is trapped with this evil alien goo living inside him, which could be interesting. When I'm saying that, I could picture how that idea could be fun. Honestly, anything can be interesting on paper, but the movie darts around starting off as some kind of sci-fi horror mystery, then it becomes a romantic comedy with wacky antics, then an action movie, and ending with them basically committing to Venom being a superhero. And it doesn't really fulfill any of these vastly different genres and tones well at all. I think they wanted Venom to kind of be like Dexter, where his gimmick is that he does epically violently murder and eat people, but he only murders people who are bad, so that makes it okay. The fact of the matter is, I'm pretty sure I've thought about this movie
How
more
long
than the
does he
writers
take
and
to take
producers
down a
did.
blue?
And to them, as
Holy
long
hell.
as the movie had Venom look how he does in the comics and have cool fights so they can sell edgy Venom merchandise, then they were happy. And of course it made a ton of money. I haven't even mentioned the plot yet because
wait on the
it
jump.
really doesn't matter. Even the characters in the movie treat the plot as if it's nothing. Some space goo makes its way to Earth. Evil Elon Musk / Donald Trump
Nice thing
generic
about
mustache
viegar
twirling
is that
villain
the wolf
archetype
always hits-
sees the space goo as an evolution of humanity because that's what every villain in movies like this does. Meanwhile, reporter Eddie Brock breaks into the lab where they're testing on the goo and happens to get infected with it, and boom, Venom is born. Then Venom fights another Venom and the movie ends. It's not like I'm particularly surprised that Venom doesn't have an ounce of subtlety, but the dialogue and character arcs are so surface level that characters practically announce the themes and how they feel about each other just for the sake of explaining why one Venom can fight another Venom. Possibly the worst scene in the movie that has been mocked to no end is when Venom announces to Eddie that on his home planet, he was a loser.
On my planet, I am kind of a loser.
Comically, intentionally or not, providing commentary that Venom, as a character, is a loser. The film literally tells you that the titular character who is on the poster is a loser. Wow, what a way to reinforce how Venom is a terrifying, unstoppable force to be reckoned with. The dialogue in general is just
Fuck, I
stupid.
didn't have my ult up, otherwise you would have died.
Even whipping out the classic, "You're not so different, you and I," line that robs any scene of drama because of how done to death it is.
You and I are not so different.
And to be honest, that line hardly even applies because I'd argue Venom is actually massively different from Eddie Brock in basically every way possible, from his physical form all the way to his personality. One thing I feel like I'm quite forgiving of in these superhero movies is that if the action is indeed epic, creative and interesting, then I'm willing to let go of some of the smaller issues because at least it'd be doing something well. If this film did have incredible action, then at least that would be a decent reason to watch it. However, the action is also pretty terrible. This is for two main reasons. The first is that the power of the Venom goo is never properly established or explained. It's so overpowered that it can apparently bring people back from the dead and create what seems like an infinite amount of matter out of what originally is only a tiny puddle of sludge. The second reason is that the visual effects are so laughably terrible that it's hard to take anything seriously. The best action in the movie is probably the first scene where Venom saves Eddie from an attack on his apartment, but even then it's just a significantly worse version of Upgrade, a film which is basically Venom, but if it wasn't total shit. The unintentional humor of it all is the only thing that saves Venom from being a complete drag. I've only seen the movie twice, but I'm glad to say that I wasn't as bored as I thought I would be with a repeat viewing. The first half an hour is somewhat of a slog, but as soon as Venom gets involved, it becomes so stupid and try-hard badass that it's kind of entertaining to see the crescendo of idiocy reach its peak with a nauseating boss battle that is so visually noisy that it's almost impossible to tell what's happening. So, all in all, a pretty high recommendation from
I
me.
like that back.
Ant-Man and the Wasp is the very movie that people mean when they say, Marvel movies are bland, Marvel movies are pointless, Marvel movies are lame. Honestly, I refuse to rewatch it because I don't think I could sit through it
Hit the
again. Once was more than enough.
Come on,
Marvel
bro.
still hasn't proven to me that this character deserves his own movies. I like Ant-Man enough, sure. He's fun when used in an ensemble cast with other more interesting main characters, but watching an entire movie based around him is exhausting. They're the most expected, middle-of-the-road, mediocre comedy action movies that hardly even build on the character whatsoever. Sure, the Wasp has top billing this time, but what does she do? Fight people in an Ant-Man suit that can fly. Great. The best
Oh,
scene
she
in the
didn't get
movie,
Sonya's yet.
hell, the only scene in the movie with real consequence, is the after-credits stinger, pardon the pun, that vaguely sets up where Ant-Man is in time for Avengers
Yeah, the one that
Endgame,
FFs
or
is the one
whatever.
that gets
Well,
caught
that
out
was worth
first.
sitting through
That's
2
how
hours
this
of
game goes.
ass-eating Michael Pena, wasn't it? For the film to work, you kind of have to find it funny because it's much more carefree and pointless, for lack of a better word. Well, its point is to make you laugh and be a cute side adventure in the Marvel Universe, but it never really justifies itself as a movie. Ant-Man seems like he'd fit much better on the small screen, pardon the pun, on a Disney Plus streaming show or something like that. It was a bizarre choice to have this movie follow Avengers Infinity War. Maybe they knew how uninteresting this movie was and used the cliffhanger ending of Infinity War to trick people into seeing it, for the hope of any information on the characters we actually care about. The fact of the matter is, you could skip this movie, and you would be just as up to date on the Marvel Universe as someone who did see it. Isn't part of the fun of these films that they reach a small part of a larger story, or at the very least are used to develop and grow characters, and put them through some kind of conflict that teaches them a lesson or perspective on something? It is so hard for me to care about Ant-Man escaping a seagull when we just got off seeing Thanos throw a moon at people. Like, Ant-Man's journey in the movie is that he's put under house arrest, then sneaks out a few times, but makes it back just in the nick of time to have his tag taken off. This sounds like an episode of Superhero Squad. Walton Goggins, who is a great actor, is wasted in the movie. I mean, most of the great actors are, honestly. There's a typical Marvel villain who turns out to not really be a villain. Some other stuff happens. I'm putting myself to sleep even trying to describe it. I'm sure some people like it because it's just a cute, inoffensive romp, but I could just go and pour boiling water into an ant's nest in my garden and get the same level of entertainment value. I guess it has an ant playing a drum kit, which is pretty epic. Next.
Gives a little bit more AP, I think.
I am pretty much right down the middle on Deadpool 2. I feel like the reason everyone likes the character so much is also the very same reason that makes me dislike him and find him intensely irritating and unlikable. But there's just too much good work that goes into making the film a cohesive, thoughtful story to really get too angry over. I don't think these Deadpool movies are quite as irreverent and clever as they believe they are, but that's not to say they aren't entertaining at times. At its core, it's actually a pretty simple and done-to-death kind of superhero story, but uses this structure as a backbone to deliver jokes, while also trying to get you to emotionally connect with the protagonist. But unfortunately, I don't really find it very funny, and I don't think the emotional moments work either, because of the tone the outrageous comedy sets. It is a difficult thing to balance, and I don't particularly think it really achieves it, although this is probably because of my sense of humor. Everything I've already said about this movie could be spun in the opposite way to describe exactly why the movie is good. I suppose what bugs me the most about Deadpool 2 is how it actually plays it pretty safe in the grand scheme of things. I'm so into the idea of Deadpool being used as a platform to mock the never-ending stream of superhero films that are being shit out every year. I picture something like Airplane, which is perfectly parodying a done-to-death tropey type of movie, which puts comedy before everything else to the point where nothing really makes any sense, and it's so absurd that that's exactly what makes it brilliant. And yes, while Deadpool certainly does mock superhero tropes, it's rarely through anything he actually does, and it's more just quips and snide remarks that hardly even relate to anything that's actually happening. My point is, I think the humor is so on the nose that it makes any attempt at drama feel like a waste of time within the movie. One thing I will say from memory is that the Deadpool 2 Super Duper Cut, which is effectively an extended version of the film with slightly different jokes and added scenes, is much better than I remember the theatrical cut being. To tell the truth, I was actually dreading rewatching this movie, but I was pleasantly surprised that it wasn't quite as bad as I remembered it being. I find every supporting character to actually be a lot funnier than Deadpool himself. The standout to me was Josh Brolin, who plays the villain, not villain, whose deadpan, straight guy delivery is such a contrast to Deadpool that it makes basically any retort he has incredibly funny. It takes a long time for Brolin to be properly utilized in this way, because his character is a serious antagonist for most of the film, but they do get there eventually. As far as the humor goes, it passed Mark Kermode's 6-laugh test, which is supposed to dictate if a film is worth being considered a comedy, with my final laugh meter running at a whopping 8 laughs, which is actually quite good for me, considering how annoying and Family Guy-ish I find these Deadpool movies at times. My last points about the humor are that I think it relied a bit too much on repetitive jokes from either the first movie, or driving jokes into the ground that they thought were funny in the second. Possibly the worst joke in the movie is when they have the rocks to make fun of dubstep. Gosh, how avant-garde of you. One time I could just about deal with, but they think it's so hilarious that they repeat the dubstep joke 3 times. For such a self-aware character, it's strangely unself-aware to mock something so outdated and irrelevant in meme culture, ironically turning itself into the very thing the film acts as if it's avoiding, being a tropey, out-of-touch superhero comedy. I'm also somewhat torn on the fourth wall break self-awareness, which I know is crucial to the character, but I just mean I think the cleverness isn't always there. I think the funniest instance of this type of humor is when the shock collar has a code they need to break, and someone just says 7 and it works. There's such an ultimately unimportant detail that the humor works well for me. However, they use the same joke earlier in the movie where they're explaining how Cable's time travel device works, ending with Deadpool saying that the writing is lazy, mocking the kind of trope that a lot of other superhero movies do. It's with this kind of thing where the meta comments bug me, probably because they don't really do anything clever except point out how bad their writing is. Just because you know how bad and shitty something is doesn't somehow make it not shitty because you're aware that you're doing it. And I know it's supposed to be making a point or statement, but this is precisely the lack of subtlety that bugs me. If the jokes don't land, then it kind of ruins entire sequences or scenes. Surely these fourth wall breaks would be the best chance to subvert what would normally happen for some kind of comedic effect, which they do a couple of times, but not enough for me. For example, towards the end of the movie, right before Colossus fights the Juggernaut, Deadpool proclaims that a big CGI fight is coming up, which means the film is well aware that this is a dumb, annoying trope that gets tiresome, but then they still go ahead and have a big, dumb CGI fight that looks dreadful and goes on forever, just like the movies they're making fun of. So again, it's not really a unique spin that would make the fight scene interesting to me. Surely it would be much funnier to use the anticipation of a big, dumb CGI fight for a punchline of some kind, like having Colossus beat Juggernaut in a single anticlimactic punch, followed by Deadpool saying something about how anticlimactic and shit that was. There's just something that irks me about a movie that knows it's wasting my time. In this same line of thought, it's bizarre to me how they don't use Deadpool to alleviate some of the terrible shit about the movie. Namely, the special effects are mostly pretty bad. The worst example being when a CG Prius drives into a gas station and explodes, and it looks like a video game cutscene from 10 years ago. When Monty Python figured it would be too expensive and difficult to use real horses for the Holy Grail, they just ran around like fools and used coconuts to make the horse clop noise to compensate. That's taking a constraint and turning it into comedy that's witty and absurd. If you don't have the money to recreate the type of excess that usual superhero movies delve in, then think of a way to mock the tropes without just being a worse self-aware version of the movies you're supposed to be a satire of. Those are most of my major issues with the movie. I thought the action choreography was actually pretty good for the most part. It's a shame they blow their load so early with an action sequence which is far more entertaining than the one that is supposed to be the climax of the film though. I also particularly liked the character of Domino, whose superpower is that she's just really lucky, who is used to full effect in some creative action scenes. It's details like this that I think are more entertaining and clever, that I think these movies could benefit from having more of. When it's at its best, Deadpool 2 is mad with childish, cartoonish jokes, family values, hilarious violence, sound effects, and pretty cool action. But when it's at its worst, it can be grating, feel bloated and overly long, cocky, arrogant. There's a strange air of cheapness to the movie, in a way I don't think was intended. Overall, I think the film is probably better than the original movie, which has already aged horribly, but not much for me. Well, that was a lazy last paragraph summary for this movie. Well, whatever. I use self-deprecation to shield myself from any criticism of my writing because I know it's bad, lol. Black Panther is fascinating to me. It's a movie I really did not particularly enjoy on my first viewing, but appreciated a lot more on my second watch. I think it's still got a ton of sizable issues that bog down the experience though. I appreciate the cultural significance of the movie. It's important for a lot of people. Even in my white bread county, there were ecstatic black families taking pictures with the poster outside the movie theater, which was awesome to see. I already have plenty of superheroes that look like me in the Marvel universe, so it's cool that others might get to experience that. In fact, here's a picture I took of myself last night. I know I don't normally show my face, but honestly, look how hot I am. I basically look identical to Captain America, which is pretty cool. I'm also just as strong and ripped as him, probably. I think the biggest problem I have with Black Panther is that the main character doesn't have anything interesting happen in his journey as a protagonist until an hour and 40 minutes into the movie, where he finally learns something and changes for the better. His personality isn't strong enough to carry the plot on its own, so it suffers until he's given something interesting to do, which obviously makes most of the movie feel like a waste of time. They probably kicked themselves after robbing Black Panther of his perfect introductory arc in Civil War, which is basically a better Black Panther movie already. So much effort went into designing these ornate costumes and building this secret hidden world, but it's largely uninteresting for such a large chunk of the movie because it feels aimless in what it's trying to do. The story is so committed to telling this grand tale of two extreme political ideals butting heads until some kind of compromise is met, but its implementation is clumsy at best. Let's start by talking about the action in the movie. It's strangely terrible. It's normally the one thing you can count on being well storyboarded and intense in Marvel movies. Even Ant-Man and the Wasp probably has better, more consistent action sequences, and I really can't stand that film. Not only is Black Panther uninteresting to watch fight because his suit is so ridiculously overpowered and can basically protect him from any peril that would add the necessary tension to make a fight scene engaging, But the visual effects work is so embarrassing at points that it nearly looks as bad as the Star Wars prequels. I don't know if this is just because the director isn't familiar with working on these effects-heavy, high-concept blockbusters, or because every animator on the planet was furiously rendering out shots for Infinity War, so they had to get the Norm of the North animators to spit out a
Fucking
couple
idiot.
rhinos and a goofy final fight that shows how little has actually
hilarious.
been learned since the first Iron Man. I already complained earlier in this video about villains who are just a superhero but a baddie version of them, and amazingly they do it yet again. I know that's robbing it of the minutia, but the conflict still just ends in one Black Panther fighting another Black Panther, and the real Black Panther only really wins because he's more familiar with Wakanda, I guess. He doesn't win the day because of him learning anything or growing as a person. He just stabs him through the fucking chest and kills him. The entire premise of the story is also stupidly heavily reliant on his MacGuffins, like flower juice and vibranium, which the former only seems to be written in as a way to somehow make Black Panther
Grab his
actually
zombies.
take some kind of damage in a fight scene, because they made him too overpowered. Oh wait, no, this has been in the comics
Get the
since
armor
the
one
60s.
first instead of
God,
stasis.
that's stupid. And the
Think
issue I
that'd
have
be
with
more useful.
vibranium, the super metal that has allowed the Wakandans to leap decades ahead in terms of technological advancement, is that it is also too overpowered. Everything in this movie is too
they're
strong.
fighting
Not only
already.
is vibranium the strongest metal ever found, but it's also a potent energy source, it's how Black Panther has his powers, and it's how he has a goo suit that can form from a necklace. When will the versatility of this super metal end? I know all of these superhero flicks are packed with MacGuffins like this, but this time it's just too far for me because of how crucial it is for having any
I was
of this
pretty sure
story
you didn't
make
have the end
sense.
there,
We're supposed to
but
be
I
in
didn't
awe of
know for
Wakanda
certain.
for how futuristic they are, but they're only that way because they happen to live near a mountain that is full of a metal that can do literally anything. The film is so packed with elongated scenes of clumsy
Okay.
exposition that have to explain these
I'll drop an
ridiculous
exhaust
comic
on him
book
just in
ideas,
case.
while also putting forward this extremely adult
hurts to be
story of
careful.
race relations, murder, betrayal, and tradition
they
that
would
only
really-
highlights how ridiculous and corny it all is. It just doesn't
Take
work.
that, yeah.
A
It
lot of
doesn't
this
really
probably
matter.
wouldn't bug me if the film wasn't so visually uninteresting. This is a great example of a film that would be considerably better if it was fully animated. You wouldn't even question some of the wackier stuff, because people wouldn't have to try and believe that a real person is interacting with a CG rhino. General audiences think animation is just for little babies though, so whatever. Another simple detail that weighs the movie down are the already dated memes and references they awkwardly shove in to try and be funny. What are those? Whip my hair, What is love, and SoundCloud all get unfunny shoutouts for some reason. Marvel humor has always had a
Yes.
tendency to go a bit too far sometimes.
Probably back up.
Jesus, this is like a parody of itself at this point. I suppose this film's a bit of a victim of how all these Marvel movies have to be shot with the same camera and have the same carefree tone to give the universe some consistency. But there are just small changes that can improve the flair of certain scenes a considerable amount. A great example of this would be the first time there was one of those Black Panther challenge fights on the waterfall. For some reason they decided to set the scene in the ugliest, most overly lit time of day as possible. So the green screen soundstage escapades show up so much clearer than if it was set, say, at sunrise or sundown, where the beautiful African sun could be used to establish a better sense of mood, atmosphere, or visually enforce the idea that Black Panther has risen to power. I don't know, I'm just spitballing here. The sunset at the end of the movie looks stunning, so it's not like they're not capable. On the same note, the climactic battle scene is completely ruined for me simply by how stupid everything looks. Actually, basically every action scene is ruined by the visuals. Even the opening fight is so dark that you can barely tell what is happening. If there was less awful, ugly action and more time spent establishing and explaining the rules and regulations of Wakanda, then I probably would have liked it more. The film simply requires you to turn your brain off to a point where I just get bored. Top it off with Martin Freeman's terrible American accent, and you're left with a largely forgettable movie with noble, ambitious themes, but not a single key factor that can stand strong enough to make the movie an entertaining watch throughout. Basically, what I'm trying to say is that I'm racist, and that's why I don't really like the movie. I guess this is the movie I'm supposed to hate. I've never seen a Teen Titans Go TV show because I don't watch baby shows, but I used to like the original Teen Titans when I was a kid. But this film
There's no
isn't bad.
minions, we
It's a
can't really
neat,
push.
self-aware animated flick that is more creative
maybe
than it
get them here
looks.
too.
The story of the movie is literally that Robin is upset that everyone else except him is getting superhero movies made about them, mocking the mere existence of itself. From that description, you can imagine the kind of tone it's going for. Nothing's too serious, the stakes
guy
remain
pushes
pretty low,
really
and it's all
slowly.
about the gags. I was surprised that I was
Still
finding
like
myself
damage,
laughing laughing a fair amount. Maybe it was the surprise that it wasn't complete trash? I don't know. I will say though that I did get pretty tired of it after about 40 minutes. Not that it was doing anything particularly bad, but my mind was starting to wander because I wasn't really being engaged by anything. It's the problem with these hyper self-aware movies. Sometimes it gets to a point where it feels like nothing particularly matters because they constantly remind you that you're watching a movie. The humor works best when it's lovingly making fun of DC characters, but a lot of the other jokes fall flat to me. For every laugh I did get, there were one or two missed jokes that really didn't land. The animation kind of feels TV-worthy a lot of the time, but there are a few instances where different animation techniques are used that are much more entertaining. The standout is a Lion King parody that is animated in a Disney kind of style. Don't really have much more to say on this movie. It's fine. I'll never watch it again. It's not really worth hating or particularly loving in my books.
I don't know why
Aquaman
we're
is
letting our
terrible.
host run
So
out here.
terrible that it goes from being laughably bad to boring and uninteresting, then back to being laughable.
Stop lying to me!
But then weirdly creative
I
and
could've
cool,
either there.
and then it ends and you're just like,
Bit of a missed opportunity. I
"What
kind of
the
want
fuck
to
did I
save him
just
for when
watch?"
they engage
You're probably
stuff.
amazed that I have Aquaman this high on this list,
Shiv
but I
is
simply
not
can't
here.
express
This
how
is
much
a
fun I
pretty
have
free
watching
pick.
this stupid
We'll
ass
see who
movie. The
comes.
director James Wan is the expert at making these bloated, brain-dead, substanceless action movies, but at the same time making them thoroughly enjoyable throughout. Say what you want about it, but the film does have a personality. It's so vibrant, colorful, and energetic that at points I couldn't believe how simply epic it was. It's a movie that is so much greater than the sum of its parts because so much of it is blatantly terrible. The dialogue is corny as hell, the acting ranges from glorious chewing of the scenery
Killed my father.
to actually being so bad that it's hard to watch.
Are you saying they executed her?
The visual effects can be surprisingly decent, but there are also plenty of instances where it looks like total garbage. It's a film that combines the inspiration, knowingly or not, with other movies like Black
Sonya's is
Panther,
still
with
pretty
them
broken.
both being their own universe's equivalent of Atlantis, having ritualistic battles for the throne. A bit of Thor Ragnarok's in there with the 80s tone and synth music, Colosseum battles and the breaking of the main character's weapon. A bit of Tron Legacy's in there with the extreme use of light and color. It becomes Fast and Furious out of nowhere for a little bit. Then Indiana Jones. Then a horror movie. Then Jurassic Park. And there are probably more I'm not even thinking
Yeah,
of.
beat her
The
in a
point
fight
is,
pretty easy.
it's just fucking epic, dude. I also appreciate how the main character of Aquaman does actually learn something by the end of the movie. It's not exactly a new or fresh take on the reluctant hero,
gonna
but the
stick
fact is
around.
that the character is more noble and heroic by the end of the movie, compared to how cocky and arrogant he starts off as. And they do this without making Aquaman feel like his power is a burden. He actually loves every second of being a superhero, which in itself makes for an enjoyable character to watch. The cartoonish melodrama of it all is the key as to why it works for me. It's either intentionally not taking itself too seriously at all, or it thinks it's so incredible and grand that that makes it funny to watch because of how lame it is. Honestly, I think it's the only way to pull off such a joke of a character that Aquaman is. I'm sorry, Aquaman fans. He'll never be taken seriously by general audiences, so he needs to get the Fast and Furious treatment to stand a chance at being enjoyable and profitable. It's just so stupid that you can't help but laugh. And to give credit where credit is due, out of the movies I've talked about so far, Aquaman has the most memorable cinematography, camera movement, action choreography, stunt work, and art direction. It reminds me of what I like so much about the tone of the Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies,
swear
or of
this
a
used to
video
be
game like the
1.5.
Resident
That
Evil
might be
2
what's thrown
remake,
off my
or even
timing.
going as far as early Doctor Who, which rides the line so beautifully in being so cartoonish and bad that they kind of become good by how overt and lacking in subtlety they are.
Sounds like my wife.
Another aspect I genuinely feel is quite good is the motivation of the main
James trying
villain,
to
who
frontline?
hates humanity because of how they've polluted the ocean. Sure, it has no subtlety at all, but given the context, that's actually a pretty solid reason to have a problem with humans if you had to live in the ocean. I just like how they weren't afraid to get weird and spend $160 million on a movie with all this crazy shit thrown in. Goofy little details like jellyfish being the light source in certain scenes, or how hair looked in the underwater sequences are so charming to me in an over-the-top way. It is so unfiltered in its stupidity that before Aquaman fights Ocean Master in the Colosseum,
Ocean Master.
they literally show the stats of each other like a video game. I mean, come on. I will say I think Amber Heard in this movie is unforgivably bad. There is no charm or charisma
Why
to
you
her
backing,
performance,
bro?
and she has next to no chemistry with
No,
Aquaman.
he
I think it
built
would have been
stuff, I
better if
guess.
they had replaced her with the CG octopus that was playing the drums in that one scene. Let's all agree that that would be much more epic.
Yeah, we
Aquaman's
coulda
not a
ended,
film I would
but
blame
sorry, when
anyone for
Top and
hating with a
Jungle went
passion. Trust
nowhere.
me when I say that every terrible negative you have about this movie will have
I mean,
me
look how
nodding
fast
along
you're
with
gonna
you saying,
demolish.
yep, that's totally true. But I simply cannot ignore the ridiculous amount of work that went into to
Let's
a
get the
fucking
Nexus now.
Aquaman movie that actually wound up being fun as hell to watch. And until another movie can show me a crab person jumping out of a crab dropship, which then lands on a shark, but then a different shark goes beast mode on the crab, which is followed by an underwater fire catapult exploding a ship, which then ends with what looks like a Liplorodon biting another crab person.
Poor guy, he
Then
just
I
kept
will
getting
stick to
ulted by
calling
me.
this film the epic king of excess that it is. Thank you very much.
That's probably
Incredibles 2
1600
is a
AP by
solid
the end
sequel
of
to
that.
the classic 2004 movie that stays true to its core cast of relatable, likable characters while showcasing a masterclass of character design, animation, and action storyboarding. The smart thing about
Oh
the
yeah,
Incredibles
that's a
family
big
is that
damage
there's
part.
going to be some aspect of the characters' relationships, personality, wants, needs, or goals that will resonate with you in some way.
So the
that helps
tier
ground
and
them
the
and assist in
Zonians give
connecting
me
with
so
them
much
as people. Whether you're a
survivability, it's
dad who
actually
struggled
crazy.
with helping your kid with their math
would
homework,
recommend it.
an excited young boy who has his whole life ahead of him, a nervous young
see
lady
you
who's
guys.
still trying to figure out her place in the world.
My LA hoe.
Who filmed this? Somehow the
In a world that's keeping us apart, it's amazing how a free taco can bring us together. In spirit.
Everyone loves a good blockbuster. We simply can't get enough of the heroism, romance, action, suspense, epic scale, and stakes. A good high-production motion picture gets everyone excited. But most importantly, it gets the wallets going. Big blockbusters are known for printing money. That's why we get so many of them, which leads, just like the Not Disney and the Not DreamWorks collections, to cheap rip-offs after cheap rip-offs and scummy impersonations all after a slice of that delicious, lucrative pie. There are whole companies that exist solely to ride off the success of popular movies like the infamous Asylum films. But I want to go deeper than that. I have chosen 4 of the most interesting looking Hollywood rip-off movies I could find, some going as far back as nearly 4 decades ago, to see what kind of craziness was out there to add to my ever-growing collection of rip-off atrocious cash grab films. And no spoilers, but one of these 4 movies is probably the worst film I have ever seen in my entire life, and I know I've said that quite a few times at this point, but believe me, this time I mean it. Some of these movies were so rare and hard to find that getting physical copies was a massive pain in the ass, so I had no choice but to find them on the darkest depths of the internet. So let's introduce the list of movies, shall we? First up, we have Turkish Star Wars, which speaks for itself on what it's ripping off, I think. Alien 2, which was released right after the success of Ridley Scott's Alien. Psycho Shark, or Jaws in Japan, is yet another shark movie riding off the success of Spielberg's Jaws. And finally, a shitty little animated film called Savior of the Earth, which is a shameless rip-off of Tron from 1982. As you've probably worked out, I wasn't able to get a physical DVD of this one, so I just stuck a printout of the cover onto a copy of Richard Hammond's biography that I just happened to find abandoned on a bench when I was walking my dog. I'm not going to bother randomizing this one on a big wheel because there are way fewer films to cover, so let's just hop in and get rolling. Oh, the garbage is hurting my eyes, it stings. Turkey Star Wars. Oh, hang on, no, I read it wrong. It says Turkish Star Wars. Turkish Star Wars, or The Man Who Saved the World, or if we want to be ultra accurate, Dünyayı Kurtaran Adam, is the most manic crazy shit I've ever seen. The DVD case even makes the very bold claim that it's quite possibly the worst film ever made. Whoever heard that before? Which, if true, would be a convenient way to end the search for the worst. But is it really that bad? Well, let's dive in and take a look. Your first thoughts are probably drawing you mostly towards the title, Turkish Star Wars, as most people call it. The box looks like a Star Wars movie. They use the official font. In a lot of ways, it may look like any number of the other rip-off films I've covered before. However, if I was going to give you one piece of advice, it would be to not doubt for a second the unpredictable nature of Turkish Star Wars. Instead of being a goddamn big baby and just copying other movies to try to trick grannies into buying it, this film is unique because it quite literally has pirated footage from the original Star Wars within its own runtime. The story goes that all of the elaborate sets they had built for this movie were destroyed in a storm because they assembled them on a beach for for some reason. I don't know, that's what the trivia says. The studio then refused to pay for the set's reconstruction, so the producers were left with no choice but to bribe a night watchman at a Turkish film distributor and proceed to pirate copy a print of Star Wars A New Hope. So almost randomly throughout the film, there are a bunch of non-sequential shots from Star Wars that they use to loosely attempt to fill the gaping holes in their hilarious script. We're talking about a movie that is such a bodge job that they somehow managed to scramble together in about 2 months of total production time, with about a quarter, maybe less, of the movie being completely pirated from other sources, all culminating in a feature that is almost entirely incomprehensible, all the way down to its opening credits. Oh, okay then. The story loosely seems to resemble that of Star Wars, starting with a space battle, characters being stranded in the desert, an evil villain who wants to dominate the universe, and an epic cantina showdown, except the main difference being that here, things just sort of happen. I really don't know why. You'll probably drive yourself crazy if you attempt to rationalize what is being shown here, so please just do me a favor and bear with me as I attempt to explain what you're seeing, as I slowly descend into fucking madness. The first 3 minutes is nothing but a confusing Lord of the Rings style narration explaining what's going on. I say explaining, most of which are just random clips from A New Hope, which if you look, they've been all squished and they don't look right because this film is shot in a different aspect ratio to Star Wars. From what I can gather from the terribly translated text, humans moved out of the space age to the galaxy age, where the Earth and planet systems turned into a galaxy system in space, and people started an intense struggle to discover the secret of eternal life. So essentially we're talking about a universe that is so advanced that their main goal is to discover how to live forever. Everyone is unified under a single roof, where every nation, race and religion have merged together into a single entity. But then they describe how people still live in tribes on Earth and constantly nuke each other, despite how aligned they are. They literally nuke each other to the point where pieces of the Earth begin to physically break off into shards. Phrased in the narration as, however, that sometimes the ear H crumbled into small pieces. Then they talk about how the Earth was made to fall apart madly and became matter out of beams and energy 5 billion years ago. God, I feel like I'm going crazy reading this. Blah, blah, blah, blah, blah. Who was the enemy? Who was the enemy? Not even the movie knows. Blah, blah. Resistance formed using a layer combined with human brain power. Blah, blah, blah. I can't take more of this. Clearly, there is one of two things happening here. Either this is entirely lost in translation, or it is just complete nonsense with no explanation. Anyway, the two strongest Turk warriors are sent somewhere to fight an unknown enemy, when in actuality, it's just actors green screened in front of random clips from Star Wars. About 10 minutes pass of seemingly unrelated battling from A New Hope, and finally the real thrust of the movie comes into play. The two main characters wind up stranded in a desert. They banter about how irresistible to women they both are, and the actors stand there and have to pretend they're seeing a bunch of ancient historical remnants, such as the pyramids and a sphinx, indicating that they're on a remnant of Earth, long forgotten. Wouldn't it be cool if we had music and champagne? Our titular hero randomly says, still hoping deep down that they crash-landed on a planet only populated by women. Ah yes, every woman's number one weakness, a romantic whistle. Oh, good lord, I'm absolutely swooning. Unfortunately for our dudes, the sexy as hell whistling instead attracted a bunch of skeletons riding horses. I know, it's really annoying when that happens. Cue the pirated Indiana Jones theme and commence a huge fight with the skeletons. Oh, this is the best. I cannot believe what I'm seeing right now. The action in this movie is totally mad and is easily the best thing about it. Half the time it seems almost completely improvised. Like, did you really need to run underneath that horse? What, are you crazy? It makes me wonder how many people got horrifically injured during the making of this. Quite a few, I expect. For some reason, this film likes to try to jump scare you. What is this, Five Nights at Freddy's? It's actually quite cute when it isn't alarming or confusing. The fellas get captured and are forced to fight in some kind of gladiatorial battle, where if you win the fight, you get to walk away with your life. So after a few children are murdered, I guess there's another big fight. This is kind of how Turkish Star Wars goes. Fight. Travel somewhere. Fight. Repeat. Apparently, the original cut of this film was about 2.5 hours long instead of the barely hour and a half length of the DVD that I watched. It was cut so short supposedly because the production team was worried about the marketability of 2.5 hours of this, which in the end I am incredibly thankful for because this film already feels about 2.5 hours long already. It's fun at first and it has flashes of hilarious brilliance here and there, but it's so bare bones, so impossible to understand because of everything that was cut out that it really starts to grate after a while. The main actor in this movie actually wrote the screenplay. I said wrote, which is probably why his character is so incredibly flawless and irresistible to women. It's pretty similar to the ridiculous way Tommy Wiseau wrote his character in The Room. Speaking of women, they stumble across some lady whose only character trait is that she's hot and mute. So there are a creepy amount of scenes where the two potential lovers just stare at each other and smile for what feels like minutes at a time. The Obi-Wan Kenobi wise teacher character shows up
Kimsin sen? Bir ihtiyar.
and rattles off a bunch of crazy ass exposition about how the main characters used to be robots or something. I really don't know. The main thing that I did pick up on was that the villain of this movie is explained as being the owner of the shard of Earth they're stranded on. It's all extremely flowery and hard to follow. The villain Darth Vader-like character is sort of a dictator figure. The scenes are frustrating because he quite literally just repeats the same type of dialogue about how strong and unstoppable he is over and over and over and over, and it just never stops.
Ben kuvvetliyim. Ben yenilmem.
Man, there hasn't been any action for a while. Alright, yeah, a bunch of mummies kill some children. There's your action fix for a while. Possibly my favorite scene in the movie is a bizarre training montage where the lead character awkwardly smacks rocks, karate chops more rocks, and eventually becomes so powerful that he's able to chop a rock in half with his bare hands. Meanwhile, the other main character is playing with, what is that, sand? To top it all off, our protagonist straps rocks to his legs and proceeds to jump around like a kangaroo, training his muscles to the point where they're so powerful that he has the ability to jump extremely high into the air, and most definitely not without the aid of a trampoline hidden just out of frame. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention this film likes random things exploding. That just happens sometimes. There's a fight in a cantina for some reason, probably because Star Wars did it. I really can't tell who they're fighting or what they're doing because there's no consistency. I'm pretty sure the costumes change between shots all the time. It's just a nightmare to keep track of. They're captured yet again and are put in dandy clothes. The villain wants to join forces with the hero, but our guy is just too pure of heart, so he shows him a brain. If that's supposed to prove something. Alright, I suppose spiky Darth Vader wants to harvest their brains. Let's just move on. Fight! They get beamed and captured for the 40th time. Then something so horrific happens that I simply can't describe it.
Hiçbir insan bu işkenceye dayanamaz.
Oh, is he gonna run my lane down?
Oh, hang on, it's fine. They standed the torture.
İşkenceye dayandılar.
Fight! Fight and jump! Jump the enemy to death! The great whistler and sand player gets captured. And the main character gets a lesson on the importance of Islam by Obi-Wan Kenobi. Also, there's some mention of a sword. Remember that, it's important. Fight! Oh, there's the sword. Nice. What a ridiculous, impractical design. Luckily, the mute woman just shows up out of nowhere and whips out a brain and is finally able to talk.
Kılıç ve beyin ölümlü insanın eline geçinceye kadar konuşamazdım.
Oh, right, of course. Because she was destined not to speak until the brain and the sword was held by a mortal. Fight! The protagonist frees his friend, but his friend arrogantly takes the ultimate weapons and takes on the villain one-on-one after being tricked by the magician. The magician is the main villain, by the way, that looks like Darth Vader. It's simple stuff. I've been describing it this whole time. If you are lost, you are dumb. You're a dumb idiot if you just don't understand what's happening in this film right now.
Sihirbaz kılıca ve beyne dokundu. En sonunda istediği oldu.
What? I'm so sorry, this is genuinely the story. I have no other way of making it more simple. The sand smacker gets killed, and things get really serious.
Keşke dünyadaki sevgilim de beni sevseydi.
It's time to take on the baddie one last time. To prepare for the fight, the ultimate jumper melts the ultimate sword down into liquid and makes gloves out of them. Ah, yes. Now the ultimate fight of all time happens. Intercut between the emotional battles are clips of the Death Star destroying Alderaan. You on the world, you idiot. Oh, okay. I don't know what this means. At long last, the final battle is here. Everything has been leading to this, and what happens is so beautiful. I have no words to describe it. I guess all the training earlier must have paid off, because his strength is so mighty that he quite literally cuts spiky Darth Vader in half. So with balance restored, our guy flies away in the Millennium Falcon to return home for another adventure. Beautiful stuff. I'm so torn on this movie. You instinctively want to give it a bit of a pass because it seems so dated, cheap, and old, and you simply can't ignore how charming so much of it is. However, just for reference, this film was released in 1982, the same year as Blade Runner, E.T., and The Thing, all classic, timeless movies. Now, obviously I would never expect the same quality from such a tiny production, and the film only seems to exist to ride off the success of the first two Star Wars films, but the only thing I really genuinely like about it is the childlike energy in the action scenes. Aside from that, everything's pretty nauseating. Basically, every element of the film is bad in some way, be it the stolen music, the footage in the wrong aspect ratio, hauling mixing, awful costumes, dreadful editing, scatterbrain pace, and writing. I find films like this really hard to even critique in any way, because a lot of why it's so bad is obvious. Just look at it. Despite how boring and tiring it can be, I still have a weird affection for this movie. I'm not surprised it has a bit of a cult following, because in the right context, this film could be entertaining as hell. Alien 2. The real one. Alien 2 on Earth sucks so hard I almost left it out of this video. Sneakily named Alien 2 right before the trademark of Alien was registered to cash in on the success of one of my favorite movies, Ridley Scott's Alien from 1979. It's an English-dubbed Italian-American production that admittedly does seem more like a real movie in comparison to Turkish Star Wars, which actually came out 2 years after this, but nevertheless is ultimately quite unable to fulfill the need of being entertaining or worthy of its scummy name. If you look at some of the older VHS designs, it's way more obvious that this film is trying to trick audiences into thinking it's from the Alien series, but the DVD copy I have is more abstract with a big bulging eye. There's a big outstretched hand that's spooky. Oh yeah, and there's some spelunkers. What has that got to do with Alien? Don't even bother getting excited though. All the answers are lame. It's not totally hopeless though, let's be fair. There are some things of note, including some weirdly good untapped ideas, but you know, it's still mostly pretty shit. The cheapness of the movie is quickly made apparent by what appears to be stock footage making up the first minute. The story relies on a team of astronauts coming back from space and bringing some kind of alien substance back with them. But like, if you can't properly show any of that, why not just change the script? Have it be, I don't know, an asteroid or a bright flash in the night, a crashed pod, something that actually makes sense within the limitations. Add on top the fact that this film has no respect for your time, and it leads to such an incredibly frustrating experience. For example, before we even meet the main character, they do shit like waste 32 seconds of screen time on a garage door slowly opening, the car casually reversing out, driving away, and then closing the garage behind them. We learn absolutely nothing in that time. It is pointless. Not to mention the fact that after this, they show the car driving for another 15 seconds more. What is this, Birdemic? It pisses me off so much when it's so transparent that they have no idea what to actually do in the movie to fill time to a feature length. I reckon you could probably cut about half of this film out, and not a single thing would be different about it. It's called an establishing shot, not an establishing minute. Yeah, really setting that horror tone. It takes 6 minutes for the first event of note to happen. The main character is this woman who's an expert on caves, who's being interviewed on TV. It's really boring.
Hello.
The lady, let's just call her, Maureen from now on, has a headache and is taken off set.
You know, Thelma's telepathic, and when something happens, she senses it, even at a distance.
What? Why is this guy just like, oh right, of course, yeah, that explains it. She's telepathic. Yep, that's a normal, everyday response to that, yep. 10 minutes in and probably the worst aspect of the story has already taken root. Maureen is a superhero who can foresee events before they happen. The only purpose it has in the narrative is that it robs the suspense, mystery, and surprise away from any potentially scary scene. Because every single time something is about to happen, she straight up ruins it. This is quite possibly the most bizarre choice in the entire movie. It shows a total lack of understanding of the genre, and it doesn't complement any kind of character, story, or growth. It's genuinely completely pointless. And it's not like this telepathic thing was just in there because it was in Alien. God, it's so dumb. Maureen heads over to the beach to meet her boat-dwelling therapist. Of course, it takes a full 40 seconds to watch them slowly row their boat over. Yep, that's it. Keep going. It's not like I've got anywhere to be. The only thing that would be more boring than this is if they went bowling or something. Oh, for God's sake.
Thelma, I seen you on television. What happened?
Yikes. This bowling scene is supposed to establish the gang of spelunkers before they go on a mission. Yep, and you guessed it. It's really boring.
Oh
Ticking
my gosh,
away the moments that make up a dull day.
Oh, that goes so
Fritter
slow.
and waste the hours in an offhand way. Poor Maureen has a telepathic vision on the beach. No! And we finally get some alien action. A little kid finds an obscured bit of jelly that explodes on her face. Nice. Thank God something happened. While the spelunkers are getting dressed, one of them goes outside and finds a mysterious ball of sludge and brings it with them. Over a third of the movie is over and we're finally in the cave. All of the scenes down here, at least by a production standpoint, are surprisingly decent. I assume they filmed this within a real cave and that's why it looks so good. I just don't believe they would go to such lengths to create such impressive scenery when nothing else in the film is on this level. The fact I can't even tell is a good sign either way though. The director must genuinely really be passionate and love spelunking, because they spend an obscene amount of time showing the team crawling around, slowly descending, really slowly descending, gradually lowering themselves down, engulfing themselves in darkness as they sink deeper and deeper. We still going? Yep. Still going down. I'm running out of ways to describe the act of lowering yourself downwards. There's a really awkward sex scene as they go to sleep in camp, and when they wake up, they split up into groups to go exploring. We've got spelunking to do. One really annoying detail that bugged me more probably than it should have is how so many of these people were wearing helmets, but without the strap done up. What's even the point of wearing the helmet, you dingus? After they walk around for a good minute, one of them notices the stone from earlier has started moving around, and it sort of explodes in her face. They waste 3 minutes showing footage of the spelunkers going down and climbing up to get to the girl who got attacked, who seems strangely intact despite the attack. They then slowly lift her unconscious body up, and then we finally get the best sequence in the entire movie. Boom, alien out the head. Look at that eye. Then there's some weird looking, what I think is reverse photography, where a bit of meat flies at the camera, and a pretty nice visual effect where this guy's head falls off. Unfortunately, you never really get a good idea of what this abstract alien goo really is. Sometimes it's a physical creature, other times it's a rock, and next up it becomes the walls. It's shot in such a way where you purposefully cannot tell what is really going on, which can be okay in some horror movies, when the mystery is used as a drip feed of subtle deaths before they reveal more towards the end. But they do such a bad job of building tension or remaining interesting that by the time you actually get to the deaths, it's kind of too little too late. Maureen has another vision.
Answer me.
And every character is picked off one by one until Maureen and her boyfriend only just manage to escape. They drive around for a while and start noticing that everyone seems to be missing. It's implied that every single person in the world has disappeared. Oh, despite that shot where you can clearly see people driving around in the distance. Of course, they go to the most obvious location in times of crisis. The bowling alley. Oh, really again?
I'm gonna go take a look around.
Like any good horror movie character, they split up for no reason so they can quadruple the potential danger they're in. Oh, I guess he died and became tripe. Didn't see that coming. Alone and scared, Maureen runs around the isolated city until she gives up. The camera pans towards the sky and text pops up that reads, "You may be next." Wait, next for what exactly? I'm so unclear on what actually happened here. So here's the thing about Alien 2. There's some really brilliant ideas in it, seemingly by accident. A horror movie being set in a creepy cave is a genuinely excellent idea. Films like The Descent, which is a good-ass movie, have since lived up to that potential. But you have to give this film credit for doing it first. Speaking of, get this. The director of this movie actually tried to sue the producers of The Descent for being vaguely similar, not seeing the irony in how he himself only got away with making Alien 2 under the false pretense that it was a film from a more popular series that they didn't own the rights to. That they only just managed to dodge a $10 million lawsuit from 20th Century Fox because the word alien is hard to prove ownership of. Not cool, man. Despite how boring and cheap this movie is at times, and how bad the script is, and how I really would prefer to never watch it again, now and again it does do something that shows some competency. I like some of the transitions between shots. That's something, right?
Alright, let's go in the game.
The smallest bit of talent did shine through this stalagmite-sized piece of shit. So for that, all I can say is, thanks for not being a bad shark movie. Psycho Shark. Psycho Shark, or its real name, Jaws in Japan, is quite easily the worst film I've ever seen. And I know I've said that at least 7 times at this point in the past. But trust me, back then, I hadn't seen this. For as much of a classic as Spielberg's Jaws is, I will never forgive it for starting the killer shark craze. I've already covered Shark Exorcist and Jurassic Shark, which were genuinely so bad that I didn't think a shark movie could, for lack of a better word, sink any lower. Here we are. Where to even begin? Where to even begin with you? This one is so goddamn lazy that its tagline is simply underwater terror. Yeah, I'll wear that on a t-shirt. Who the hell buys these films? Aside from me, of course. Beautiful girls are in danger is the first line of the blurb. At least this film doesn't beat off around the bush, or does beat off around the bush. You know what I mean? Right. Sit down, listen. This film exists for 2 reasons. Firstly, to rip off Jaws and the endless cascade of killer shark movies that just will not stop. I'm gonna drown in these things one day. We, as the human race, just cannot get enough of shark movies. Move on. Find another animal to obsess over. And secondly, its second point of existing is to show off scantily clad Asian women in swimsuits. Congratulations, shark movie. What a original idea. I don't even know how much footage I'm going to be able to show because it was that exploitative. Every single scene feels like the start of a porno. The whole time I was waiting for the intercourse to begin. And I'm sorry to break this to you. I'm genuinely sorry for what I'm about to say. But the shark that's on the cover is in a total of 2 scenes in the entire film. The first of which is a fucking dream sequence, which doesn't even happen, so that definitely does not count. Meaning that when the shark does show up, when the shark shows up for real in this movie, it is in the final 2 minutes of its running time. The final 2 minutes. Imagine me, this dumbass right here, sat watching this bullshit for 68 minutes straight, and then this is the payoff to the name. I hate this film so much. You just don't understand. It might look kind of funny. It does look funny, look at it. It's ridiculous. But imagine if you were only allowed to look at this, to see this, after looking at a white screen. Nothingness. total blank nothingness for 68 minutes straight. That describes the experience to me. That might as well be the story of this movie. Nearly the entire film is set in 2 locations: a creepy looking hotel room or the beach. That's it. The movie is loosely framed around a girl who's sat in a hotel room watching footage of previous girls who've stayed there, like found footage or something. I guess there are some creepy guys who convince a couple of dumb lost college girls to stay at their lodge and then sacrifice them to a shark. It sounds like a category on
I
porno.
counter Galio
Yeah, that's
so
the end, that's
hardly.
the whole story. The rest of the film is just various shots of girls bending over to show their cleavage or ass. Now for some of you out there, this might sound like a great movie that might make it worth watching for you, despite the fact that we have this thing called, oh I don't know, the internet, where you can search for whatever your heart desires at any time of your choosing. Maybe I could understand it if this film was released in the early 90s, where rude material was a bit harder to get a hold of. But it was released in 2009, for God's sake. Oh, that's the same year they released that other nearly
Man,
naked
Galio
ladies
has
in
me
the
so hard,
wilderness
but
movie.
like game, I'm just
Or
viegar.
Avatar. The amount of time dedicated to shower scenes is almost commendable, if it wasn't so creepy. I tried to find a picture of the guy who directed this, but no images of him seem to exist anywhere. I can only assume he looks something like this. The last thing I'll say about this movie that should perfectly encapsulate everything that it's going for, all the subtle nuances it's going for, is with this excerpt of that Aaron Sorkin-esque dialogue. I mean, this stuff's good. Listen to this. It's salty. You licked it? Salty. The water's salty. The blue ocean is extremely salty. Yeah, isn't it salty? Most pornos have a better story than this. It's simply too boring to be worth anyone's
This
time.
Mordekaiser was kind of like
Seeing as I had less
me
to
in the
say about
Nautilus
Jaws in
video.
Japan than I initially thought, let me just shout out an honourable mention that nearly made it into this video. Seeing as we're currently going with a Spielberg rip-off theme for this segment, I have to mention this bizarre find known as Dinosaur from the Deep, released in 1993 to ride off the success of Jurassic Park. The story is absolutely absurd.
couldn't do
It's
any
set in a
damage to this
world where
guy.
the death penalty is abolished, so the government
He's got
sends
this,
criminals
this,
back in
and this.
time to where their sentence still applied. And I guess dinosaurs get involved. The entire movie is in French and I couldn't find any working subtitles, so I just skipped through it to admire the awful special effects.
death count under 5. See you mates.
Maybe one day I'll